Welcome to part 2 on the Minolta X700 in combination with the Minolta 50mm 1.4. Before we have a closer look at the camera and specifically also talk about the lens, let me show you a short video and some results from the second half of the roll of Fuji Acros 100. Okay, here we have an issue. I have a Fuji Acros 100 ISO film. The conditions are relatively dark, which means that I have to shoot at 1.4, which is a ridiculous aperture with regards to preferred depth of field for this composition. But let me try it anyway. I'm going to focus on that tree right in front there and see if we can create that miniature effect, miniature look and feel that I achieved in the part 1 of the Minolta 700. Let's give it a try. Let me start off by saying that since I've been using the Minolta MC 50mm 1.4, it has actually rekindled my interest in the 50mm focal length. That's something that I need to explain. So I will take you back to the end of the 70s. In 1979, when I purchased this Pentax K1000, which came with a standard 50mm 2.0 lens. When you bought an SLR back in the day, late 70s, early 80s, all these cameras came bundled with its own 50mm standard lens. Most of the apertures, the largest aperture being 1.8, 1.7, 2.0 and sometimes 2.2. And this lens I never really got a grip on. I did use the 50mm for candid, portrait and a little bit of model photography. It is a fine lens, but it's not an exceptional lens. And for me it was a little bit of a difficult focal length to use for the type of photography that I was into. The reason why this lens has rekindled my interest is the fact that this lens provides exceptional quality with regards to sharpness and contrast of your images. And especially when you're working with analog photography, with film, you want to have the best possible lenses available because it really makes a difference. So the 1.4 fits extremely well with regards to depth of field, low light conditions, but especially image quality. It has actually triggered me to find compositions that fit a 50mm focal length just because of the image quality. Right, so now it's time to have a closer look at the Minolta X700. Let's first have a look at the top plate, where we see a main dial for a program mode, an aperture priority mode, and the shutter speeds ranging from a B bulb mode all the way through to 1/1000th of a second. We also see that the camera now is in the off position, so we have a switch in front of the camera to go to an on position. There are two positions to turn the camera on. We have an on position, standard, of course the off, and we have a second on position that gives an acoustic beep, for example for underexposure or for the self timer. So we can turn off the acoustics with the other on position. We can change from aperture to program mode by pressing in this button here, which is a little bit awkward to do with one hand. And you have to press it again to go to the shutter speeds. After that, there's no need to press the button, and you can just choose the shutter speed or go to A for aperture mode. Of course, we have a film counter, right top. We have the film advance. We have the shutter button. The camera does not work without batteries. And we have a dial for over and under exposures of -0.5, 1, 1.5 or 2 stops, and the same for the plus 0 to 2 stops and a half stop increment. And all the way to the left we see here the ISO level, which we can dial in. That's the top. When we look at the back, we have a retainer for the film that's in the camera and an ISO versus a DIN table. The bottom of the camera, we see that it can also use a motor drive, and it has a battery compartment, of course. Again, this camera will not function without a battery. When we look at the front of the camera, we see here the self timer, which we can pull up. It's a 10-second self timer. And when we press it all the way down, we can hold on to the exposure, so it's an exposure lock button. On the other side, we see the lens release button, we see a remote shutter release connection, and we see a depth of field preview button. And the MPS stands for Minolta Program System. So all in all, a very straightforward camera. Now let me point one thing out, because I bought this camera secondhand, and I bought the lens off another Minolta camera, and you can see that my UV filter here on the side is dented. I haven't been able to take it off of this lens yet. It hasn't damaged the lens whatsoever, so only the outer ring of the UV filter has been slightly dented. It hasn't affected my photos whatsoever, so that will be coming off soon. One thing I could really appreciate with regards to this camera is the film advance, which we see here. This white part of the film advance, when you put in the film leader, it catches on immediately, so it will never slip off. It's a very secure system to use. All in all, again, a very straightforward camera. It has a program mode whereby the camera determines, based on the ISO level and the light meter, the best choice of shutter speed and aperture. We have an aperture priority mode, which I primarily use with regards to this camera. And of course, when we release the aperture mode and go to the shutter speeds, we have the ability to use this camera in full manual mode. Well, I hope you liked the video on the Minolta X700. and specifically in combination with the Minolta MC 50mm 1.4. Thank you for watching, greatly appreciate it. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, and you're more than welcome to subscribe to my channel. Take care, see you next time.